Okay, good afternoon to everybody. I'm Michele Fiorentino, General Chair. I'm glad to introduce you Antonio Marco Pantaleo, Research Fellow at Imperial College, Professor at University of Studio Bari, Consultant of Italian Ministry of Research. He has more than 20 years of experience in multidisciplinary research in renewable and clean energy, energy system, biosystem, energy use in agriculture, engineering, and food processing. From 2020, he is a program manager in European Innovation Council. And today, I'm glad to introduce him for this talk about EU funding opportunities for disruptive innovation in the field of digital transformation, computer-human interface, augmented reality. I give the floor to Marco, that is also a very near friend to me. Go, Marco.
Thank you very much, Michele. And I hope you can see my screen. Let me know if it is not the case. And thanks so much for inviting me. Michele, is a real pleasure, even if I have to say, can you see the screen correctly? Oh, yes.
Yes, Marco.
Even if I have to say that as from the introduction, very kind introduction of Michele, this is not my field of expertise. I'm an electric engineer. I'm professor of applied physics. My background is on renewable, sustainable energy and clean energy conversion processes. So I'm happy to provide here some insights about EU funding opportunity, in particular within Horizon Europe, and the role of the European Innovation Council in the innovation ecosystem, and in particular of the program managers. I'm one of the 4 program managers recently recruited, but there is an open application processing ongoing for other 6 program managers. So in particular in the topics of augmented and extended reality and digital transformation that could be of interest for you. I will explain you quickly why. So my presentation will focus on firstly on what is a European Innovation Council, why it could be interesting for such innovative research field as augmented and extended reality, and everything that is related to this, which is really at the forefront of research and innovation. What are we doing as program manager, and in particular a researcher? I'm still researcher. I will come back to research after my temporary role as a program manager. What is the added value that an external expert can bring to the Commission? What are our key responsibilities? And what are the opportunities, most important, most interesting for you, of funding in the field of, in the topics of the conference. In particular, I will present briefly the call, the challenge call on awareness inside, and some example of startups that we are funding in EIC related to augmented reality. EIC is in Pillar 3 of Horizon, which is focused on transforming best research into innovation, business, money. So the idea, the challenge is to nurture innovation, to support breakthrough non-incremental research since very early stage, very low TRL level, facilitating the development of fundamental research to find the right applications and to offer the opportunity to best researchers to develop their idea towards the development of startups, spin-offs, and innovation for the society. The focus of Pillar 1 on the ERC is to increment the scientific knowledge, to be being driven by curiosity, genuinity, and interest for science, which is fundamental, of course. But Pillar 3, in particular the EIC, is focused on transforming best research into innovation, addressing societal challenges, and trying to give to best researcher all the tools, the elements to engage with the innovation ecosystem, and to be able to develop spin-offs, establish startups with so-called scientific entrepreneurial mind. We, of course, have a budget that is a minority part of Horizon Europe, which is about 95 billion euro in the 7th framework program. We have about 10 billion euro. Most of the budget is in Pillar 2, that is addressing societal challenges, and in particular, Cluster 4 on digital, industrial, and space is the area where there are most of the calls of interest for you, with typically TRL quite high, so from 4 to 6, 7, while breakthrough and incremental research is usually funded by projects in Pillar 1 on Pillar 3. What is the one key difference in Pillar 3? That we are funding a cluster of projects, not a single beneficiaries as in ERC, but a group, a consortia of project or proposal composed minimum by 3 partners, as in Pillar 2. This is valid in particular for the Pathfinder and for the transition. So the 3 instruments that we have at EAC are, again, the Pathfinder, which is focused on non-incremental, breakthrough, high-risk, high-value research with grants up to 3-4 million euro, and 2 possibilities, open or proactive or better challenge calls. The open calls are ERC style bottom-up, open to every kind of brilliant research. The challenge one are the one in charge of us as program manager. So we identify key areas where we need to foster research, where there is not enough attention in Pillar 2 or in other instruments at European level. So where it is really worth to give an opportunity to brilliant researchers to develop their ideas. We justify why it is timely, why it is relevant, and why it is not enough covered by other tools. And we launch a specific call, challenge based at Pathfinder, to capture brilliant idea around a given topic. Pathfinder is a very low TRL. Then we have and it's for project composed by minimum 3 partners. EU-based, we can accept partners outside EU, but not giving money to them. This is the case also for Switzerland, which can join Horizon Europe projects. This is valid for all Horizon Europe project costs, not only for EAC, but they should get funding from their own country. This is also valid for Canada, for other countries that usually can be interested in joining, but they should be funded by their own countries. In the transition program is a tool to specifically support projects to increase their TRL level from 4 to 6, 7. So to go from a proof of concept developed in Pathfinder to something that is ready to be developed at scale, to be scaled up and to be used as a deep tech technology for a startup that wants then to apply to the accelerator, which is, I would say, the core, the second big pillar of EIC. The accelerator is a very unique instrument that funds startups, spin-offs, research spin-offs, or every entrepreneur, inventor that want to bring to the market that idea, mono-beneficiary, so that's destinated only to small, medium enterprises. I will show you some example of this with a blended finance mechanism. So the Commission for the first time is co-investing in the form of equity in these startups, giving money in the form of grant up to 2.5 million and equity up to 15 million euro with some procedure that probably I don't have time to explain now, but are in the slides, and I'm available for any clarification. Pathfinder is 100% is covering 100% of the cost of the project, as any research innovation action in Horizon Europe. The same for transition. I forgot to say that transition programs is restricted to already to project or ideas that are arising from an already funded Pathfinder or ERC proof of concept project. So we restrict the access to transition to projects already funded that want to go on, that deserve to better explore the research idea towards innovation. This is the scheme of the three programs available for funding research and innovation in EIC. What is the role of program manager? Basically, three key pillars that we have. One is to write the work programs. So it's a key policy action. We define the challenges in the share of the budget of EIC that is top-down, so not open to all kinds of ideas as bottom-up, but focused on a single specific topic. Each year we choose an area for this. Year we have chosen, I have chosen green hydrogen generation, and the other Pathfinder challenge that is not in charge of me, but is interesting for you, is awareness inside. I will briefly present you in a while. But one key responsibility that we have is to build strategic intelligence and identify the niche research areas that deserve support to guarantee European technological autonomy, to address key societal, economic, and sustainability issues. And this is done, of course, with a work that includes interaction with best scientists in hot topics that we identify within the commission with the other DGs, DG research, environment, energy in my case. And the other key area is to develop a proactive management approach, a so-called hand-on approach. So what we want to transfer also to the team in EIC and to the project that we are supervising, a sort of approach where we don't want to control the project. That very often happens at European Commission level, but we want to support project and help project to develop at the best their ideas, their research, their innovation, trying to overcome the key issues, for instance, putting project in cluster grouping project and trying to catalyze innovation, add the key missing players that could be corporates or could be other startups or investors interested in the idea developed by the researcher. So it's a work where we don't have the role to control at all, but we have the role, the responsibility to identify areas most promising and try to work on those strengths of the project to facilitate the development of the research toward innovation. So catalyzing innovation with a supporting role. And then there is the other role of, as so-called ambassador, communicating this outside. This is what I'm doing now, actually, presenting these opportunities and this new mindset of EIC with the recruitment of program managers. What is interesting for me as a researcher to gain a vision of all projects funded and not funded, ongoing in a selected broad area. Energy in my case, not only in EIC, but also in ERC or in interacting with the clusters, the other clusters in Pillar 2, participating to the co-creation groups to write work programs of the other clusters. And having a sort of drone vision of where research is going, which can be useful to support specific research that are focused on specific areas, sometimes can miss the cross-sectoral knowledge contamination and opportunities that come from a broader vision of a research problem.
Hi, Marco.
So
I think we are.
I go quickly because
yes.
okay, I have under
Sorry.
2 minutes, 15 minutes. I go quickly to the examples of the call that is interesting for you. The call is on awareness inside, that has the ambition to assess and analyze key breakthrough research around the concept of awareness. So what is and when a user would expect from what a user would expect from a service or device that has awareness inside. In particular, this call I believe is very linked to the augmented reality and mixed reality concept, because it's addressing a number of aspects of awareness over different temporal, spatial, biological, technological, and social scale, with the ambition to define an integrative approach for awareness engineering, demonstrate and validate the role and the added value of performance and flexible and reliable user experience with a class of artifacts and services for augmented reality concept, and developing proof of principle or proof of concept of technologies that go far beyond the current state of the art, that rely on, for instance, on neuroscientific and physiological methodologies, and possibly in a range of applications that could be safer robots, self-driving cars, critical infrastructure, decision support, and so on.
Okay, Marco, I think so. I think we are really running out of time.
Okay,
and,
thanks. So these, if you need some more information, you can find here. These are some examples of funded startups in augmented reality and funding mechanisms here. Thanks. I finished. Okay.
Thank you, Marco. Sorry for interrupting, but I want to tell everybody that we created the Discord channel, EU Founding Opportunities. I'm really invite all the attendees which are interested to take part to this kind of programs. We can join there and having a long-lasting collaboration, starting from putting our interest in this Discord channel, and Marco will be happy to be part and assist us in this program. Now I want to give the floor to Joe that will introduce the next panel. Thank you very much, Marco. You are very useful for our community, and I give the floor to Joe Gabbard. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. Yeah, thank you so much, Michele, and also Marco. Okay, so yes, yeah, so we are going to run it. We are happy to offer sort of our last discussion. We saved the best for last in our technical program this week, and this will be a community discussion on planning a virtual experience here, more than I can even attempt to try. So I just will, at this point, be happy to introduce Greg Welch, who I'm sure will introduce the remaining panelists. So we're happy to have you, Greg. Thanks for offering this discussion up.
Thank you, Joe. Hello to everyone. Good to see you guys. Great to be with you, and really appreciate, those of us sharing in this, appreciate the opportunity, Joe and to Ismar, to share this. I think we said this in the call, but I'm going to share my slides while I'm talking. This is a little unusual because we're talking about a research grant, but it's not a grant for us. It's not a grant for those of us organizing this discussion. It's a grant for us as in the larger community. That would be the idea. So I'll explain a little more about that here in a moment. Joe, wave your hands if my slides do not look okay, but I think they look fine. So there are several of us here today, myself, and then we have also Tabitha Peck and Valerie Jones-Taylor and Professor Garrett Bruder. Jeremy Bailenson is not with us today. But we also have on the right, you see Ryan Schubert and Nahal Naruzi, who are going to be with us kind of listening and help. They've been helping to formulate some of the ideas, and they're going to help us document questions and ideas and interest in things as we go through the session today. The 5 people on the left, we're you would call us the principal investigators for the grant that we anticipate doing. So I'll say a little more about this. This is what we want to do today, give you the basic idea, tell you where we are at this moment, why we want to do it, what we're thinking about in terms of the structure, systems, and people. We want to see if anyone's interested, see how people feel about this. This is, you'll probably hear me say this more than once, but to undertake this will be a huge effort, and it's not something that most of us would choose to take on. We would do it really because others wanted it. If the community found it valuable, we would do this. So we really want to, explore that and see how people feel. Convey some possibilities for future involvement for everybody. Last point here, this is just the beginning. This is not the end. We're just introducing this. We're going to have more events like this in the future. We want to talk with people. I'll give you a timeline here in a little bit, but there's lots of time. We're way early before anything has to be sort of nailed down. So the context for this is the U.S. National Science Foundation has a program called the SCIENCE Community Research Infrastructure. SCIENCE is an acronym. It has to do with computer information science and engineering. So it's where VR, XR, AR would live in the U.S. National Science Foundation. It would typically be within SCIENCE. There's some in some other directorates, but sort of the core is in that directorate. At any rate, that directorate has a program for research infrastructure. And as it says here on the slide, this is not for basic research. So this is not funding those of us, Tabitha, Valerie, myself, Garrett, and Jeremy. It's not funding us to do research and to have students and postdocs. That's not what it's for. It is for us to organize, coordinate, pay staff, and pay other people to build some infrastructure. So that could be a supercomputer, for example, or it could be something else. In this case, it's a hybrid of people and machines. But it's infrastructure that's going to be used by the larger community. And the community here, we have to define a community. And so our community will be the XR community. So when I say the community, or when we talk about the community anywhere, that's who we mean. We mean the XR community very broadly. And that's probably pretty much self-identifying. Note on the right, update pending. So as of right now, if you went and looked at the NSF website as of yesterday, you would see what I've got on the screen capture here with a letter of recommendation or intent required by the December 14th. That's all changing. So the program managers or officers have told us that things are changing, but they can't give us details. So we know that the deadlines will be later, that much we do know, and that a few other things are changing. So it's a little bit in flux. The program's not going away. It's there. It's just going to change a little bit. It's a little bit of a story. Probably everybody who's part of this has had some discussion at the beginning of the pandemic with, there were lots of us and lots of people, other than us, discussing like, how do we do research without being together physically present in a lab and contaminating each other? And of course, a lot of that discussion then evolved into, is this the only reason because we don't want to contaminate each other? No, there are other reasons why, we might want to do something different than we normally do. That is, we normally suck people into our labs, have sort of a single place where we run human subjects one at a time and then send them back home. So just a little bit of thought here. This controlled lab-based sequential, again, bringing everybody in one at a time, doing them, versus maybe a little less controlled, sending things out to people, executing tasks, subject iterations in parallel. And there are limitations on all of these. I like to think this is a phrase that I learned from Fred Brooks, the liberating constraints, that sometimes by constraining things, so in the case of maybe limiting the hardware that you're going to use in this distributed infrastructure, it could be liberating in that you can actually go farther because you're not dealing with a lot of complication. You're dealing with something relatively narrow, so you can generally go, you can sometimes go a little bit farther. So here I'd like to bring in Tabitha and Valerie Valerie Taylor-Jones and Tabitha Peck, who have experience and done lots of research, personal experience and lots of research in the area of diversity. So there are other reasons why we might want to do something like this. So Valerie or Tabitha, would you guys like to inject a little here?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I think one of the really nice benefits of something like this is that if we can build a diverse participant pool, we're no longer going to be pulling from our lab groups or from our very small communities, but instead be pulling from a larger group of people. We could be pulling in gender, race, socioeconomic status, educational diversity. We can just have a much more diverse population, which overall will give us better research and less biased research and more generalizable research. So that's a huge advantage of this. Valerie, do you want to add a little bit more to that?
Yes, I also wanted to note that when Tabitha is talking about diversity, it's important in the participant sample, but it's also important in those who are creating and distributing the content as well, and the researchers, so the full process. And just thinking and considering diverse groups of people throughout this entire process as we may build this infrastructure means that we could come up with different ways of even building the technology. So an example that I want to give is when we all logged on, we were trying to get the same background, right? And what happened when I'm of a darker skin tone, when I did the background, I had a bit of trouble. So I'll show everyone here sort of what happens, right? So you can kind of see sort of my image sort of going in and out there. And these are the signs, the sorts of things that can happen when you aren't considering the diverse populations or people who may be utilizing the product or the XR technology. And we can think about this not just about race or gender, but ability status, right? People who are disabled, et cetera. So this is just one example here. So let's see if I can get back to where I was. And so it's really important to consider how we can integrate these diverse perspectives across the spectrum to ensure that we can develop, test, and of course, replicate different sorts of work and research across these different groups. We know things don't naturally compare across groups for all sorts of reasons. And so we think this could be an important tool to investigate these sorts of ideas.
Yeah,
so some of you might, real quickly, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing here. I recognize we have not yet told you exactly what it is we're doing, and yet we're referring to the thing that we haven't told you about. So it's a little, it was in the abstract, so be patient. We'll get to that here in a minute. Sorry, Tabitha.
Yeah, and so a nice thing is that, even if we are in a lab group that might not be as diverse and might not be in a position where we can take in more perspectives, being able to run experiments on a more diverse group of participants also can give us nice feedback. So we can ask the questions of the participants, what did you experience? What challenges did you experience? So that we as researchers can still include that diversity into our labs if we might not have it there yet.
So not putting, again, there's the chicken and egg thing a little bit for us, but the lack of experience point there, it was just a thought, some of us recognizing, and not just us in the group here, but more broadly, that we go typically to great lengths to make sure that our human subjects these days don't know anything about VR. They're totally ignorant of anything. So we don't want them to be biased. We don't want them to have expertise or anything. But obviously, as the world's evolving and the general population is changing, more and more people are getting more experience, and we want them to have more experience. We want them to be sort of regular users. So there's a little bit of that factoring into this. Garrett, I'm going to put you on the spot. Professor Garrett Bruder, do you mind, do you have anything you could add about replication or statistical sort of considerations for a large fixed population that is used repeatedly?
Yeah, of course. I mean, many of you probably attended Ed Swan's session a few days ago at ISMAR, where, of course, we have one of those persistent challenges in our community that we are running studies once, and then we just take the results as truths and never go back and reconsider them, or run studies with a broader population, or do those things that other communities, like for instance, our folks in psychology already are doing. Right, so this is also some of the one of the goals that we are considering with our planned infrastructure in the scope of this project that we are going to present to you in just a little bit. So just to allow us to go back to some of those participants, to run more studies with them, to gain a broader participant pool, and as Tabitha and Valerie were saying, gain a broader range of participants to give us the diversity that traditionally we in our field are just lacking. And we, in the past, we've been always focusing on convenience samples, or most of us have been focusing on convenience samples, and this could allow us to really gain this broader perspectives that other communities, like in psychology and social psychology, etc., have already been discussing, and they already came up with solutions kind of similar to what we are going to present to you in just a little bit. Okay. Handing back to Greg.
Perfect. Thank you, Gerard. And by the way, what we're about to keep this foreshadowing. Sorry, it's not trying to be mystical. Just what we're going to present is not intended to replace anything we would all normally do. It's meant to be complementary. And so this would be a separate mechanism that could be used in some cases, might not be used in other cases. We have down here stable supported mechanisms. So like any infrastructure, if it was a supercomputer or something like that, you would expect that you'd be able to log in, run a job, get results back, and do something. So that's a similar idea here. That would be a goal, that it would be stable in that way. So as part of the ending the story here is we're all thinking about this, and again, the we is the royal we everywhere. We're thinking about this, who's doing what, and we in the smaller we have been unable to find anything that really kind of did everything we imagined. And then we became aware of, or became aware of, because I've certainly been aware of it in the past, this NSF program for building infrastructure like this. So hence we started looking at that. All right, so now stop with the teasing. We'll give you this is what we're imagining, okay? So it's a little notional. A lot of this is notional, and a lot of the details are, to be worked out, and we want to keep it at a high level. So the idea, again, is it's in the abstract of this session, but here it is. We have this curated subject pool, and, budget-wise, we're kind of looking at numbers. It could be like around 150 individuals who are a panel of subjects that are stable, and they're around the country and eventually around the world. And as Tabitha mentioned earlier, we would be choosing these people in a very considered way. So we'd curate this population to get the demographics we want in every way you could imagine, and reliable people, and then send them. I'll talk about this in a minute, but we'll send them equipment, and then we would push out experiments to them and get back results from this population, which is what I've got here. Storing and saving the data, that's another part, which I don't go into a lot here, but we can talk about it later if you want. So archiving data, maybe archiving the applications, just at least for posterity's sake, potentially for replicability later. It also occurs to us, of course, if we had this infrastructure, we could do non-HMD based experiments. So we could just do surveys, right? We could push out to this population, try to get them to tell us something about their either normal use of this equipment or other experiences. It doesn't have to be in world for everything they would do. So those of you who are halfway awake and have been attending the sessions might have seen yesterday the paper presented by Alexander Klippel. And so it's really was wonderful to see that. And I'm very happy to say that Alexander is going to be with us today, at least for part of the way. He's actually logged in here somewhere, and there he is, I see his name. And he's going to join us for some discussion later. So go read his paper if you're at all interested in this and you haven't seen this, go take a look. Right, so he's at Wageningen now in the Netherlands, not Penn State anymore, but that's we're happy to have him with us. We're also happy to have with us Anthony Steed. Many of you probably know Anthony's been thinking about this and doing it with others. So you can see some co-authors here for quite some time, at least since the beginning of the pandemic, if not earlier. I remember papers Anthony presented, oh gosh, I don't remember, way back when, that were about collecting data from distributed uses of VR. So Anthony's with us. He's also going to be available for the discussion. We're going to have some, by the way, some discussion here within the Zoom session this hour, and then we'll also have the Gather Town discussion afterwards. Something I wanted to point out, though, that I thought was really funny, amazing, is you look at this article by Anthony and a bunch of other people you guys, we all know. And I was reading this article, and there's a section in there, look at the heading here, long-term solutions, right? Generate pools of users through funded hardware distribution. Keyword is funded, and you zoom in on part of that, and you see a little section that says some government scientific bodies, for example, the National Science Foundation of the US, could provide funds. So lo and behold, like a year ago, they were writing about this possibility, and here we are a year later looking at that. So it's a good sign. It makes me feel good to have seen that. All right, so some perceived advantages. Many of you thought of this. We're trying to capture some of them. Others have said we need it. We're not aware that anything exists. There are some other structurally similar and some other related things, and we'll highlight a few of those here in a little bit. We talked about this a little bit, Tabitha and Valerie, more and Garrett, more data, better replicability, the ability to do longitudinal studies and things like that. So all of that is there. Reliable subjects, so we can get, that's part of the replicability. We can get them back again. Ideally, we can go back and do things. They're experienced, better logistics maybe. So the infrastructure is stable. You don't have to set it up every time you want to do something and then tear it down and then set it up again and then tear it down. It's just there, at least for the period of the grant. So a couple of trade-offs, positive, all the advantages we just said. These are things we can think of, okay? So sort of neutral, we'll cover this in a minute, but we imagine the study design to use this infrastructure and the IRB approval would be relatively similar to what we all do now. I'll touch on that a little more in a bit. So some negative things to think about for something like this. Of course, there's less flexibility, fewer measures. You can't, if we're only going to have a limited set of head mounts in this population, then you're not going to have the most fancy schmancy, whatever it is, latest head mount, and with lots of body measures and physiology. I mean, we have to see what we can do, but it will surely be limited compared to what we can all do in our lab. You'll have to pay the price of like submitting something, getting it into the pipeline, getting the data back out the end. So there's that. And we recognize that there are going to be bottlenecks around events like submission deadlines for conferences and things like that. So, and we don't have an answer for that, but it's something we're aware of and we need to kind of think about that. So just to calibrate everybody, this is how far off we are. And this is given the timing that's in the solicitation now, which may change. But we're, over something like at least 4 or 5 months before we would even submit a proposal. Then it's really a year. If we even get funded, it's a year before the project would even start. And then the project would probably last 3 years. It could be 3 to 5 years, but we're looking at probably 3 years. And then the idea is NSF doesn't want to fund this forever. So what they want is to be able to stand something up, proof of concept, show that it works, and it's so valuable that it continues on its own. So that would be the Vera 2.0, us figuring out together as a community, how do we keep this alive? What's the funding model or the economic model and the things like that. I will point out, by the way, there are other organizations like Garrett alluded to in psychology that are big organizations that do related things. They're all volunteer. Completely volunteer, and they've been going for years. People love them, they use them, they're committed. So it's an interesting data point for me to see that personally. So the idea of this Vera 1.0 prototype, we're going to build it, we're going to build the infrastructure, we're going to establish all the relationships with the community, some relationships, we're going to establish some procedures, we're going to try and see if we can make it work and see if it's valuable, see if people like it, or what parts they like, what parts they don't like. So it's an experiment. Throughout, we often, when we're talking with people, there's of course a desire to use lots of different head mounts and things like that. We have to think about how to make it as less complicated as possible, because every complication we add adds risk and might mean that we are unable to actually do what we're trying to do for people. So we have to, kind of balance those things. We've been having lots of discussions. We have ongoing discussions with various researchers, with lots of companies, with different organizations. So I'm not going to go into details of those, but lots of stuff going on. When this is eventually stood up, I'm being optimistic here, imagine it's funded and stood up, it will be maintained by all of us, by the royal us, that is people in the community. I'll cover that in a little bit, some roles that people could have. So it's not just us, the investigators running the show. We are coordinating and trying to weave the infrastructure into the community and pull back feedback, but we're not the deciders, if you will. It's going to be the community. Here's my favorite diagram, my Martian spaceship diagram, again, with Vera in the middle, and the subjects are kind of a part of Vera, and then the community around that. And of course, the XR community. So this is all our researchers. Garrett mentioned Ed Swan before. Pick anybody, Joe, Gabbard. You guys will be like, submitting things to Vera, and you'll get data back. So there's this cycle of stuff. We recognize that although NSF, believe it or not, it's not a direct goal of this program to support others outside the XR community, like education, healthcare, entertainment, whatever. In general, NSF, of course, wants that. And in general, we all want that. A lot of us work with those people in education, healthcare, and things like that. So what we're envisioning is that there's a group, a subset of the XR community who are self-selected, who volunteer to be listed as, we don't know what to call them, but we'll call them experts or domain interface experts. So people in the outside communities, if they want to do something using this resource, they might come to like Ed Swan, if Ed is listed as a domain expert and says, I'm willing to talk with people in healthcare, for example. So healthcare people might come to him and have a conversation, and they might together use the resource. So so it would be this cascade, right? The outsiders go, the domain experts go to Vera, and everything comes back again to all of them. Hardware systems that you might think about. So that's an obvious question. At the moment, we're imagining two classes that our population would be divided into two groups. The deployed would be us provisioning and controlling head mounts. And this would be around, at the moment, it looks like maybe 150 sites. And that's total. So we'd have to hold some back for loss and all sorts of things. Part of our goal is to keep the cost of the installed hardware down so that if something goes wrong, a subject disappears, they stop responding, whatever, they would just take the hardware. We wouldn't chase them. It's just too costly to go after them and try and get it back. So we'll do our best to find reliable, good people to start with. And that's our current thinking anyway. But then, of course, there are tons of people with head mounts out there. So Alexander, Anthony, everybody can tell you this, and they make use of it, right? So we would want to do the same. We'd want to try and identify that population, reliable subset of that population, and use them. So we would at least have these two populations. We might have some special cases, AR, HoloLens, Vive, whatever it might be, other HMDs. We'll have to see how that works. As I said earlier, every bit of every variation we add or every complexity we add can we have to be careful that it doesn't cause so much risk that it causes us to fail. So we'll have repositories of data and also applications and things like that. And there'll be web interfaces to access the data, to access the resource, to access the community, back and forth, integrated, woven into the community. So how might the structure of the operational structure look like? Again, this is just what we're thinking at this moment. We still have time. So there are the 5 of us who were listed on the first slide. So the 4 of us who are here today, and then Jeremy also, the grant PIs. We, as part of our budget, would hire some full-time staff to run things. So they would be working at sort of our direction and the direction of the community, but they would be responsible for the day-to-day operations, make sure things are running, subjects are responsive, data is going in, coming out, repository, things like that. This would include some professional person and then some part-time staff who would support that person. NSF requires, and it makes sense, some community outreach. And many of us who get funded from NSF or EU or anywhere in the world, it's going to be the same. A lot of us think about outreach and we think about it as working with other populations or children or something like that. This is not that. This is outreach to the XR community. So it's outreach to everyone here, in a sense. It's working with those people to make sure that the resource is responsive to what they want and what they're doing and their complaints and concerns, that it's getting utilized and all of that. So that's what outreach means here. Again, we would have some paid full-time staff who would work with the direction of an outreach director would facilitate that. So imagine this session here, we'd have these at ISMAR, we'd have them at VR, we'd have other sessions throughout the year where people could come and share stories, concerns, complaints. There'd be all sorts of mechanisms for that. We will have institutional review boards, IRBs. We all know that it's human subject research. So we imagine two, and I have a slide on that in a moment, but associated with the grant PIs would be an IRB. So for example, Garrett and I are at the University of Central Florida. It might be our IRB here at the University of Central Florida. We would work with them specifically for recruiting the subjects. So getting that panel in place, that pool in place. So relatively stable, one-time kind of recruitment of those people. So now, how about you guys, the rest of the XR community? You know, what might some of the roles of you guys be? So as I mentioned earlier, there's this domain interface experts. So people could be users of Vera, but they could also be facilitators of use. So working with physicians and nurses and educators or whoever else, you know, psychologists to use this resource together, as many of us already do. So we might also, we will probably have something this is required. We have to have an advisory board. So this would be a board of people from the community. It might be 4, 5, 6, 7 people who are, it's a standing board. So they would typically be there the entire 3 years. That would be monitoring what's going on and advising the operations folks and all of us PIs on what to do and not to do. Just checking my time here. We are imagining an operations board. So this is distinct from the advisory board. So the operations board would be this is again, volunteers from the XR community. It might be rotating. So people might serve for a year and then bounce off or something like that. But these would be the people who would be making sure that the things operationally are happening the way we want them to, and taking care of a few other things I'll touch on here in a minute. Then there's all of the people using the resource. So imagine, I hate to keep using Ed, I hope he doesn't mind putting his name in lights. Ed Swan's R0, so he's researcher 0. So Ed wants to submit a study to this resource, to Vera. So he would work with his own IRB to get that study approved. Then it would come to Vera and he would come with an approved IRB and it would go in and get done. So every researcher would work with their own IRB, because obviously our central IRB at the University of Central Florida can't work with every researcher. That's not going to happen. It doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. So we've had discussions with IRBs, including our IRB, and this, at the moment, this division seems like a workable division. And so I've got it highlighted here. This is repeating what I said earlier. A single IRB, perhaps at UCF, that would oversee the recruitment of the panel of all of the subject pool. And then each researcher who's submitting a study to the resource, to the infrastructure, would work with their own IRB for that specific study, getting that approved. And then, of course, as the resource or the infrastructure, the operations board would just check to make sure that that individual had IRB approval for whatever it is they're doing. But ultimately, it's up to that researcher to do that. So how might this work? We don't know exactly, but we're going to, here's a guess. It's some way it might work. So the researcher might interact with the Vera initially in kind of a lightweight way with the operations board, only to try and get them to a point where when they submit something, it's ready for success. It's not going to be kicked back because it's got some issue with it. It doesn't match the resource or something like that. So I don't know how long this would take. I don't even know if it's necessary, but it's possible something like this could go on. Once the researcher feels like they're kind of ready to, they understand, they have a plan, they think it'll work, they then go to their IRB, get approval, all of that. Then they come back to the resource, to Vera, submit this, it gets run, and we collect the data, and they go back to the researcher. So it looks a little complicated. I don't think it's too bad. There's a little bit of setup, kind of make sure we're matched to the resource. There's getting it into the resource, into the Vera, and then there's getting it out, getting the results back. Bunch of stuff here to consider. This is all, recorded and available to people offline. Again, the operational board, the rationale for something like that is that the resource itself, funded by the National Science Foundation, is precious. We don't want to waste or accidentally spend effort and subject time and board time and everybody's time on something that isn't appropriate. So we just want to try and we're thinking we're going to have some process to lightweight process to try and make sure people are on board. Obviously, someone who's done it once before, probably the next time they come is going to be like that. They're going to know exactly, what needs to be done, how it works, and it'll be very quick, we would hope. We have to think about how this experiments get pushed out. Do we collect a bunch for 2 weeks and then push a bunch out to the subjects? We might randomize them with the subjects to try and get rid of ordering effects. There are all sorts of things to think about there. We know we want everything to be streamlined. We know that. We're trying to think about that. We imagine there would be some expedited pathways for, again, things that don't require the whole infrastructure. And we're not sure how to manage those community deadlines. We talked about that. So a couple of examples here. Garrett alluded to this earlier. There's the Psychological Science Accelerator, PSA. Some of you might have heard of. That's certainly relevant. It's an organization that does something like this, not in VR, in psychology, but it's a volunteer organization, been around for like 6 years. We've been in close discussion with the director. They're really excited about the idea. They want to be involved. So we're trying to, feel that out. I don't want to imply there's some commitment there, but we've had great interactions, and there appears to be some real synergy there that we're going to try and sort out. And many of you have heard of other organizations, and there are many more that you can imagine. So these are just some examples that are relevant. Yeah, so we've had, like I said earlier, we've had discussions with HMD manufacturers, and we've been thinking about how do we procure HMDs, how do we get them out, how do we get them in users' hands, how do we set things up so that the users can do our experiments. By the way, one thing we're thinking is that the users would be able to use the HMDs for other stuff whenever they want. That's something we've been toying with. So they have the HMD, they can play games, do whatever they want. We might ask for permission to get some low-level statistics on what they're using, when they're using it, not details on, the in-world experience, but which apps they're using, when, how much. So that's something we have to figure out. So how could you guys get involved in the future? Again, it's supposed to be a community resource. So there's the advisory board, domain outreach volunteers, the operations board. Maybe someone could be involved with the PIs in terms of the grant. The money is always, those of you who do this know that the money seems big at first, and then you start to do the budgeting and it's never as much as you want. So it's always a struggle. We do have some budget for staff members, because that's the biggest thing, is none of us professors or researchers want to be in the position of being responsible for making this run. So most of the budget's going to go to professional people who are going to make this run all the time. International things, obviously question. We all want that. We're not sure. We're trying to figure that out. There are things we know are possible. Certainly if, I'll go back to Ed, I don't want to make Ed the one international bottleneck, but everybody who outside the US who wants to do something could partner with a US researcher, and then there's no issue. I think, but I don't know that it's okay for international people to use the resource independently. I've asked, I don't know. We're trying to figure this out. So, and there may be some complementary like EU or other funding mechanisms that we can partner up with. All right, so this is for you guys. I want to get into the discussion. This is for you guys, not for us. That's our goal. And if you guys don't love it and aren't excited about it, then we probably don't want to do it. So this is one approach. That's one thing we want to point out. There may be other ways to do it. There are other ways to do it. There are infinite other ways. And we're not saying ours is the best, but we'd like to try and refine it and be better if we can. If you want to get involved, you want to help out in some way, let's have some discussion now or later. That'd be great. And we will be doing more of these. So last thing is, maybe we could promote and illuminate and turn on, that sounds bad, Alexander and Anthony, who are both here to join us for the discussion for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. And we'll be here for discussing for a little bit, talking, and then we'll go to Gather Town. Last slide, I'm going to just throw up a couple things we could talk about, but these are not meant to be prescriptive. They're just in case we all need some starting points for discussion. So I'm going to shut up at that and see who else wants to jump in. Anthony and Alexander, are you guys there? I can't see everybody.
Yeah, I'm here.
And maybe Anthony's there, maybe not. I don't see his name, but that doesn't mean he's not here.
I think Anthony is an attendee right now. So he's watching and he posted a message.
So it'd be great if one of the tech people could promote him. That would be awesome. At any rate, Alexander, do you have anything you want to offer or discuss?
Yeah, I'm happy to throw in some ideas here, and I think that's an awesome movement, and certainly has my full support. I know from many collaborations, especially in the education realm, that there are like institutes that curate materials. And I think that maybe that could be a model for sort of extending the lifetime of the project that you guys envision, to have an XR institute with various missions that would be a facilitator of sort of a long-term diverse engagement, societally relevant engagement of people in XR. I think that there might also be some quick solutions. So thank you for highlighting our paper. So we were actually very surprised by how relatively easy it was to run experiments with people who have their own VR equipment. So especially sort of the Quest. I was very skeptical at first, because we had like 5-page instructions for how to sideload apps onto the Quest. And I guess this would actually be a super quick fix if we could convince Facebook to go back to the old model of the Facebook Oculus Store that they had on the go, where you could actually upload your apps and then everyone can just download them, so not have to sideload things. So I was, as I said, I was very skeptical. We had a 5-page instruction manual on how to sideload apps onto the Quest. And we had little to no issues with people actually either following the instructions or knowing the instructions anyway. So the recruitment of people and then also the technical know-how of the people to actually run the studies by themselves was actually amazingly high. As you will see in the paper, there are some things to consider. So, for example, one thing that we are not able to address this way is to increase diversity. So rather the opposite was true. So as it is, I would say by and large still the case. So the gaming community is somewhat male dominated. So our participant pool also showed this trend towards more male than female participants. But with sort of increasing number, it might be possible to have a more stratigraphic stratified sampling approach that then sort of addresses some of these issues. So I think there are really opportunities out there that in the meantime we could tap into. Again, if we convince Facebook to sort of open up their store, I think this would tremendously ease the data collection in XR.
So I don't remember, Alexander, were your subjects, the data, what were the measures you had roughly? Were they all questionnaires, or did you actually have some like physiological measures, head tracking or anything like that?
So we did not include head tracking. We did have just a general log file about the interaction. And we had a combination of pre-questionnaires and then a post-knowledge test that the participants went through.
Okay. And so, by the way, folks, I'm looking off to the left because I'm trying to look at Ryan and Nahal are kind of gathering questions from Discord and Zoom and trying to organize things for us. So I'm looking at a couple of comments from people. And if I might, let me address one or two. Let's see. There are two that I think are kind of common, two comments that are about professional users or repeated users. And there was a question from, so a couple of questions about the subject pool. Yes, the subject pool, that our vision is that the subject pool would be stable and would be the same people over and over and over again. Again, with modulo some attrition and people coming and going. But that part of that would be that we can do repeated measures and things like that. We understand that people may develop opinions about, or may compare certain experiences indirectly, unknowingly. A previous experience they had might affect a future one. So that is something we need to think about from a statistical or operational standpoint. We also want to think a little bit about where there might be some benefits for that. Let me see. There's a question about the data. That was a good question. I didn't discuss that. So the model of like the PSA, the psychological group, is that the data is closed to the researchers until they publish their first paper. And I don't know exactly how they determine that. And then it becomes open for everybody. So it kind of makes sense. I mean, NASA kind of operates in this way. ESA, they want to like look at their data first, make sure they get what they want out of it because they did all the work, designed the study and everything. But as soon as they're done with it, they can, make it available to everybody else. So I don't know exactly how, from a policy standpoint, we would, I'm a fan of not a lot of rules. So I don't know, how we can operationalize that, but in spirit it would be something like that. There's probably an embargo period where the researchers who ran the study get to look at their data before everybody else, and then at some point it becomes open to others. I'm trying to look at some of the other questions. If anybody else, Garrett or any of my colleagues, is looking at the comments and wants to jump in. Sparse populations, we've thought a little bit about that, especially when you think about people with, it might be movement disorders or other, visual disorders. So if we want to somehow work with that population, we don't know. Again, I personally, this is Greg speaking for myself, have this sort of tension between trying to push away special case things because I worry that they'll suck up, a huge amount of time and it'll cause problems with everything else because we only have a finite amount of energy and time and thought and resources. At the same time, of course I want to do that. So we all want to do that. So we'll have to figure that out. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if anybody else does right now. Anthony's with us, I think.
Yeah,
by the way.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to point out. So Anthony, since you just joined us, feel free to join our discussion.
Hello. Hi, thanks. Yes, it's a really interesting initiative. Like Alex, we've had success with online studies. We've also had failures, which obviously aren't written up because every lab has things that don't work. You can get a lot of participants through systems like SideQuest, and the Distributed XR Research Network has a website they publicize too. But yeah, being able to curate a population of people that would be ready to do these things would be great. One thing to add is if you're going to collect data, is to have maybe a sort of subgroup that could look at standardization of data collection. This is something I'm a big fan of, is that trying to persuade PhD students that pretend you're not going to read your log files for a year. So what else do you want to record? And actually, in these populations that have these long histories of doing data archiving, they have standards for what to record. So it's obvious if you point a telescope at something, you need to record where you pointed it. And if we're going to record VR, we should record, log files that other people can play back, and it would be nice to have that. We've got some contributions in that, and we're happy to have a discussion about what might be done there so people can reuse the data a year or so hence when it becomes open.
Something you said that is related to that comes to mind for me is, we as a resource, we imagine we would be, maybe it's part of the outreach, there are at least two areas that we would do this in. One is the running the studies. We would provide information to the community about like what works, what doesn't work, some rules of thumb, guidelines, like what's appropriate, and then things like the measures, the data format, things like that. Whether, I don't know whether we quote require them or everybody wants this to work. So I think everybody, is hopefully trying to play, as best they can. It might not make sense for their particular thing, but in general, we want to do exactly what you just said, Anthony. The other is IRB related. We can't control, and we don't want to control the individual IRBs, but yet there's some common infrastructure stuff that's going to be relevant to every IRB at every institution that wants to look at this. So we would try our best to gather that up, have it ready and prepared so that when, you know, Valerie wants to run a study or something, I mean, imagine she wasn't part of the infrastructure, but she may anyway. So she wants to run a study, she's going to go to her IRB. She could take this stuff from Vera and go to her IRB, at least as a starting point. They would understand now what Vera is, what it means, where there's another IRB involved, and all of that.
In terms of the standardization of participants and of data collection, I think that we can look at this as a feature, not necessarily as a bug. So if you think about something as simple as the presence questionnaire, and you're running a study where you're testing one locomotion interface compared to another locomotion interface, and you have the same participants, and you can compare presence questionnaires between the two, that's going to give you extra information beyond just the single experiment that you're using, because you're going to be able to compare across participants and across studies. And so, yeah, we do need to be aware of kind of this acclimation and this training of the participants, but I think we as a community can use this to our advantage in terms of how we're looking at and considering the data.
I see, by the way, it's great discussion, and thank you, Alex, for responding to Matt Adcock about the quest and side loading and stuff like that. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it's interesting to hear, Alexander, to hear you say that your 5 pages worked. I mean, if you gave me 5 pages, I don't know if I'd be able to, I probably wouldn't have the patience. I'd get to page 1 and I'd be like, I'm done with this. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and we have done this now with another study, and essentially the same results. So I'm not quite sure whether we just got lucky, because I also definitely know Anthony's feeling that something always goes wrong, but for some miraculous reason, with this, it works really well. So, but that is even better, right? So if you can actually have it in a developer account and don't have to go through the site loading, that's of course a big advantage, because it also then reduces the time that the participants have to spend and the money that you have to pay them, because we featured that part into the process as well. So. Mm-hmm.
And because these would be the same people through the whole period, it's sort of like we'd have to figure this out once, we would hope, and then they would know how to do it, and it would just, you know, work the rest of the time. And we didn't mention subject payments, human subject payments, but that's a part of this model. It's built into our budget, is the thinking that these people like Turkers would get something for whatever it is they do. So there'd be incentive for them to do them in a timely way. So they might get a payload of, you know, 5, 6 things, 10 things, whatever it is they're supposed to do, and they would be motivated to, you know, do them as soon as they could.
There's an interesting question from Edgar about, would people be at a disadvantage if they didn't use Vera and other people did? So how would that play into the community?
Huh. Wow. I mean, I would hope that the data of, if 2 papers were submitted to ISMAR, the judgments would be based on the statistics and on the, you know, the results as they were, without regard for in other words, if you did it in a traditional mechanism, but what you did was statistically valid and everybody understood it was, I'm not sure I see there would be a problem. I don't know.
I mean, I think there's one thing to consider here is the participant population. So if you are trying to make a generalized result and you're not using a generalized population, that should hurt your paper overall. So if you're running a study with 10 participants, but trying to make a general claim, that's not necessarily as good of a study result. But if you are running a very specific result with a specific population and you're trying to find preliminary results, that's great. So I think it's really a question of what are you investigating?
And I think also, Tabitha, you're making me think that it doesn't have to be, one or the other. It could be both. So it could be that you run something locally and you discover something, you think you see something, and then you submit this paper. And in the paper, you're saying, look, we don't know that it generalizes, but our next plan, our next step, we're going to, submit this to VERA, and we're going to see if what we saw in this population matches what we see broadly or not.
I was going to add.
Valerie had something.
Oh, yes. I was going to add also that, we're still in the formulating stages, so it could be interesting to think about how to quote unquote replenish participants over a particular amount of time. So maybe we want participants for 1 year, perhaps 2, perhaps 3. But if this becomes self-sufficient, part of the mechanism could be having a part of the staff really work to keep a quote unquote fresh participant base after a number of years, for example, to sort of mitigate some of the challenges to the best of our ability.
Yeah, I don't know that much, but I'm learning as I go through a lot of this. And Valerie, what you just said matches exactly what, I won't use names, but people at large survey companies, when they talk about maintaining these panels of subjects, like if you're a news organization, New York Times, and you want to have a group of people that you periodically query about the current events, whatever it might be going on at that time, they do exactly that. That's one of the things exactly they do in those panels, those groups of those subject pools. I think we're running up on our gather town time. Does anybody have any? I don't have any closing comments other than I'll see you in Gather Town. Does anybody else have anything? I'm just happy that, we have, by my count, 42 people in the Zoom session. I don't know how many people are watching over, YouTube, but and I don't know if the 42 people accidentally got here. Maybe they were expecting something else and they can't get out. They're trapped. Get me out of this. But it's great to see that many people. That makes me happy. I look forward to hearing more, or we all look forward to hearing. Please, I guess I would say, if nobody else has anything, reach out to any of us. So Tabitha, Valerie, Garrett, myself, Jeremy, through Joe if you want, but just directly to us. And if you have ideas, want to talk about some, say, EU or other international partnership. I'm going to be presenting this also. My colleagues don't even know this. I'm on a World Economic Forum Global Future Council for VR and AR with Jeremy and some other people you guys might know. And so we're going to present this to them also, just so they're aware, because there are people all over the world, every country, everywhere in the Middle East, Africa, you name it, Asia, all over. So we just want to, make them aware of this, and who knows what will come out of that. We'll see.
Also, if people are interested in volunteering, let us know.
And I think it's in a sort of self-serving, but again, we're doing this not for ourselves, but for the community. NSF will allow us to submit letters of support, which is a little unusual for those of you who know NSF. Normally you can submit a letter of commitment, which just says, yes, I, Greg, will do what Tabitha says in her proposal. And that's really all you can say. But in this particular case, they allow 5 letters of support, which are much broader and can say a lot more. So we're trying to think about where we go. The most important thing, because I've been on panels and reviewers for this program, is the community's buy-in. So, we'll be talking to ISMAR steering committee and others to try and see if we can figure out, first of all, do people support it? And if they do, then what is our collective best judgment about support letters? Like, that would be really valuable for the proposal to go to NSF. Anybody else anybody with video want to offer anything else? Otherwise, we could just scoot over to Gather Town.
Greg, this is Joe. I just wanted to thank you and everyone else for this discussion. And as evident by those that joined on the fly and even gathered up this week, this is an important topic. So yeah, I think the discussion should continue over Gather Town and beyond, and you're welcome. The Discord will be open for as long as we can keep it open. I think that's kind of one of the purposes of it. And so there's lots of ways to connect.
Thank you, everyone. See you in, wait, where's our room? It's
yes. Gather Town Q&A room at Q&A track A. And if you guys all want to be together, you can just go into room 1. I don't see why you'd want to split up at this point. It seems like you're.
Yeah, I don't want to split up. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, others might want to get away from me, but I'm going to go to room 1. So.
Sure. And just a kind of a programming reminder. in 30 minutes, I believe the opening ceremony will be starting, if I got that correct. So many windows and platforms that even I have a hard time tracking them. But
you need Doug Bowman's AR. It's what you need.
I don't need more screens, that's for sure. But okay, thanks again, guys, and we'll catch everybody. We'll catch back up in a little bit.
That's good. Thanks, guys. Bye.